because
at all,
the
because there was
drivers
no
were
strike here.
the drivers
Yeah,
worked normally,
they
but
were
that's also because
they work normally.
they did not receive the communication about the strike in good time. By the time they received that information, they had also heard that their leadership had been called to a meeting by the presidency. Is that what it is?
Exactly, Moomen.
But so when information came, you actually said they were preparing to join their colleagues in the strike tomorrow.
Yes, that was the intention because they didn't hear it early enough to start today with all others who were on strike today. The decision was that they will join in tomorrow because in solidarity they are fighting for a cause. It's a general cause for all of the drivers. So you can't decide not to join in. So the decision actually was to join the rest tomorrow.
How would you describe the trot business in Takoradi, for example? Because we do know that other cities away from Accra and Kumasi, you necessarily will not find the majority of the people commuting by trotro. So, for example, in areas like Wa in the Upper West region, and we'll be speaking to Swala, our correspondent there, very soon as well. People commute on motorbikes, a lot more on bicycles, but these days also on tricycles, the Motor King, and so on. Trotros usually are not the first choice when people want to commute, especially intra-region and so on. What's the situation in Takoradi like?
Well, in Takoradi, I must say, when it comes to some of these ones, the taxis are ranked higher than the trotros. You know, Takoradi is a public service city, if I can put it like that. You understand? So a lot of people would rather go for the taxis instead of the trotro. But the trotro is very well patronized here as well. We don't have tricycles, a lot of them here. When we started having them in ECMA, for instance, they put a ban on the use of tricycles in town because it was just very little inexperienced boys who were riding them. It was unsafe. So we don't have tricycles, it's just the taxis and the trotros. And in recent times, we are getting both and some of other drivers who use it, like the Uber taxi.
All right, yeah. Mary, thank you very much for painting the picture in Takoradi to us. We certainly will get back to you tomorrow to find out what actually will happen following that meeting with the presidency. We are very grateful, and that was Mary Aziz Tunde, our GBC's correspondent in the Western region. She has just been telling us about the fact that in Takoradi, not much happened today in respect of the strike embarked upon by commercial bus drivers. It was supposed to be a nationwide strike. Mary indicates that the officials of the GPRTU and other bus drivers she spoke to indicate that the information about the strike did not come to them early enough. And at the time they received the information and were preparing to put down their keys, so to speak, then news also got in from their leadership that they had been invited to a meeting with the presidency, and therefore they had, for the meantime, called off the strike action. And so people in Takoradi really did not feel the action which many persons in Accra felt this morning. We'll go over to the northern region. Our northern regional correspondent is Mutala Isa. Mutala Isa joins me on the line right now. Mutala, if you're there, so you've been listening in, I'm sure, to what Michael has told us, and that is in sharp contrast to what Mary Aziz Tunde just told us. Michael says in Tema, for example, many people had to commute on foot to work. Others had to rely on taxi services, on Uber and Bolt and other services. Many others had to go on Okada. I hear we just lost Mutala there. We'll get Mutala back on the line and ensure that we get a picture from the northern region. And I'm particularly excited about the northern region situation because it will be interesting to find out how this affected life, especially in that part of the country where most people necessarily do not travel or commute intra region or within the township by trotros. They do so using tricycles of different types, and also on motorcycles, and also mostly on bicycles. How did this action affect life in that part of the country? Fortunately, unfortunately, we didn't have Mutala, but Swala has come on the line. Swala is our correspondent in the Upper West region. Swala Abdul Wahab, thank you very much for joining us here this evening. Swala, so very briefly, I'm sure you have been following events in Wa, but also events in Accra and Kumasi and other parts of the country because of this strike action. But first of all, tell me exactly what transpired in Wa.
Thank you, Abdul. As early as 6 o'clock, I visited the lorry station to find out what was happening. And what I noticed was that the place was quiet. You know, when you are entering the station, what greets you first is the loudspeakers of the stations calling on passengers to come and pick vehicles to various destinations. The station was very quiet. I moved to the individual stations, and I noticed that the conductors were sitting without selling the tickets as they do as usual. So I inquired from them why they were sitting without selling the tickets, and they said they had begun a strike ordered by their national officers. So I came back, and then by 8 o'clock, I went back to the station. The station was the same. But this time around, the tricycles, which majority use for town riding, were also on strike. And so it was very difficult for people to move from their houses to either the market or to their workplaces. So a lot of people were actually stranded. So you could see many people walking on the streets. And those who defied the strike, particularly the tricycle operators, their colleagues who were on the road stopped them and asked the passengers to go free without paying them, and also seized the tricycles and parked them. So largely this was what happened in Upper West here. So, and what they were doing started to cause traffic. So the police had information about this. They rushed in and they were able to bring the situation under control.
So, Mutala, Swala, so let's get back to the business of the tricycles. What I do know about the terrain where you have been reporting from for years is that there are two types of tricycles. There is that type that usually has been modified to carry cargo. And then there is that type of tricycle that is meant for passengers. But often you find that some persons prefer even to ride on the tricycles that have been modified to carry goods. Now you talk about these tricycles also embarking on a strike subsequently. Which of them are you talking about? Both types, the one that carries goods or the one that carries humans, or both?
I'm referring to the ones that carry human beings. No, mostly the ones that carry goods is sometimes used for carrying human beings on market days. But because today is not one market day, it largely involves the yellow, the ones that are used in transporting passengers. You are very familiar with the terrain here. Majority of the people rely on the yellow for town movement, and so a lot of people were stranded. And secondly, today being Monday, people who work in other districts and sleep in Wa could also not go. I'd been to some places where some of these workers will usually wait for vehicles to come and pick them, but unfortunately, they stood there for a very long time and no vehicle passed by to pick them. So the strike was effective, if I should say so, because there was no movement of vehicles, commercial vehicles, that means the specific, and that of the commercial traffickers.
All right, so again, before 4 p.m., I did mention even to Michael Dewonu that I took a drive around Accra because information was seeping in at the time that it appeared as though the drivers were rescinding their decision. They were calling off the strike, and some drivers had indeed started work. Others had returned home in preparation to start work tomorrow because, according to them, even if they worked for a few hours, their car owners will still insist on a full day's sales and so on. Did you get the indication that the strike had been called off at any point in time in the Upper West region?
Yes, Abdul, we had information that the strike was suspended. So I moved to the market and I noticed that the tricycles that were parked were now active. Many of them were moved, carrying passengers to various suburbs. I also noticed that some vehicles, commercial vehicles, had started loading. In the morning, there were passengers who were due for Tumu, and as at 2 o'clock, they were still there. But when I went back, I noticed that they were no longer at the lorry station. I presume that they had left, because if they didn't go, I was most likely to still see them there. So I even spoke with the Senior Industrial Relations Officer of the GPRTU on the latest development. He told me that they had a call from their national officers instructing them to suspend the strike. And they had a lot of difficulty persuading their members to rescind their decision to suspend it. But eventually he said he had to call his colleagues in Bono, Techiman and Kumasi for them to also confirm that indeed they had also suspended the strike before those in Wahia also agreed to suspend the strike. So I can say categorically that the strike was suspended late afternoon and commercial activities involving vehicles resumed.
I'm just imagining that there were stranded commuters, and so when the announcement came in that the strike had been called off, were people scrambling for tickets and so on at the bus stations that you visited, which previously were relatively quiet?
Well, because the vehicles were parked there, there wasn't any much rush, but I want to believe that they were sure of getting space to move to their destinations. So it was a bit normal. But many of the people who were there in the morning had left at the time I went back to check the situation.
All right. Swala Abdul Wahab, we are grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much, my God. We will certainly return when there is the need for us to feed our audience with more information on this matter. Swala is our Upper West regional correspondent, and he has been painting the picture to us. In the Upper West region, he says you won't necessarily find trotros, commercial buses doing suburb rounds and so on. There are buses that actually move from region to region, and so Upper West region to other regions. That is what came to a standstill. But from within the township itself, tricycle operators stopped work in solidarity, and that had the same effect that the Trotro strike in Accra had on passengers as well. Mutala, Issa is our Northern Regional Correspondent, and Murtala joins me on the line right now. Murtala, thank you very much for your time. We've been speaking to a number of our colleagues, except Mary Tunde from Takoradi, who says there was no impact of the strike in Takoradi at all, because at the time the news had gotten to drivers in Takoradi about the strike, and they were preparing to embark on it. The same news then came in that the strike had already been called off. What was the situation in the northern region?
So the image painted by Swala Abdullah Wahab of the Upper West played very much here in Tamale. I left home very early because I had wind of the strike yesterday at about 4 p.m. And so I moved very early so I could give a situational report on GTV and Unique Breakfast Show. On my way from the house, I saw something for the first time, and there were people standing from one point to the other, from Gurugu all the way to the Chogu roundabout. And that is something I have not seen in a very, very long time because of the presence of tricycles. Like Swala indicated rightly, in the Upper West, just like in the northern region, because of tricycles, we do not have buses operating like you would find in Accra or Kumasi. We use tricycles, or people use motorbikes. In fact, in Tamale these days, you will hardly even find a taxi. So it was the tricycles who had gone on strike. There were few that were running, but they couldn't pick all the passengers. When we got to the Chogu roundabout, there was serious traffic jam there. When I rushed ahead to find out what was going on, the tricycles that were not operating had crossed the road, they blocked the road and were discharging passengers from those that had decided to work. And that brought some chaos in that area. The same story played around the Abu Abedipele roundabout to the Victory Cinema route. In fact, at some point when the strike was called off, they were still blocking road around the Abu area. This even compelled the police to go in there, and 6 persons were arrested as a result of that incident. They were blocking the road even when they called off the strike within the region. Moomen.
Wow, that's interesting. But again, we've had a number of our colleagues who work with other departments complain, especially on social media, about how late they arrived at work. Some said they arrived at work having already been exhausted and could contribute almost nothing to productivity on the day. Did you get to speak to some of the commuters who were stranded?
Mostly, they were parents who were taking their kids to school before proceeding to work. And it wasn't so much the challenge that you would experience in Accra. That is not to say that such situations didn't play here, but the impact, it is not like in Accra, because you know, in almost every household in the north, in Tamale, people have motorbikes that they use as alternative means. So it is mothers and their children, those who are unable to use motorbikes, who were the affected on this occasion.
Again, when the news came in that the strike had been called off, there were some who did not believe it initially. Again, in Accra, when it was called off, some of the commercial drivers still decided not to work because, according to them, their owners, the car owners, would still demand the full day's sales from them. So they went home, even though the strike had been called off, still leaving many passengers stranded. When the strike was called off, what was the reaction on the part of the operators themselves?
There was a mixed reaction. For instance, I was at the bus stop, bus terminal, where Savulugu, just behind the State Transport Corporation, STC, and I was there with the Kumasi bus operators when a man in this DPRT uniform suddenly came in to announce that they had called off the strike. So immediately, I was already live on GTV Breakfast Show, so we broke this story. When GTV even put this on social media, I saw some colleagues from the northern region who had gone down to comments indicating that it wasn't true. But we were standing there with the DPRTU when this announcement was made. and they were calling off the strike. Immediately, we started hearing the buses going to wah, screaming on top of their voices in the megaphones, wah, 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 wah. And then the Kumasi and other places, they all started embarking on their journeys to the various designated places.
Murtala, thank you very much. Tomorrow we shall certainly get back to you for more updates on this matter. Murtala is our correspondent in the northern region, giving us a description of how the strike went down in the northern region in particular. Fortunately, we've also been joined by the Executive Secretary of the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers, Mr. Duncan Amoah. Mr. Duncan Amoah, we are grateful that you have found time to join us here on GBC News. So, what exactly is your concern?
Well, that our drivers are not asking for anything other than reduction in taxes on fuel. We are very much interested. This is a conversation that we have had over the years. Ghanaians have expressed worry. Ghanaians have expressed discomfort over the period. And so if today the driver union also like how they have decided to confront the tax issue, we can only say that we wish authorities would at least make a conscious effort to listen, but it cannot be said that everyone is wrong except for those wielding authority or power today. I'm sure if you had the same group out of power, you will begin to see how tighten the fuel price situation is on our pocket. And so this is a conversation that we are very much interested in, and I'm happy to state that having read the petition from the driver